was in your position about 10 years ago, and I completed my internship in Egypt, and I'll talk a little bit about my career path and then some of the lessons that I learned. And some of the things will actually be redundant with what Dr. Wilson and Dr. O'Donnell already said, so I actually might skip through a couple slides just so we have more time for other things. And I'll talk a little bit about applying to PhD programs because that's what some of you are interested in, and I have experience in that. So I might spend a little bit more time on that than some other slides, so we'll see how it goes. So first, I just wanted to show you my timeline, which certainly is not traditional. In 2004, I completed my undergraduate degree, and then I actually didn't know what epidemiology was until my senior year. And I was like, oh, this sounds really interesting. So I took a job as a research assistant just entering data, and that turned into a project coordinator position because they needed somebody to run this study on arsenic and bladder cancer. And I think at the time their grant money was running out, so they couldn't afford somebody with more qualifications. So I really benefited from just being kind of at the right place at the right time. And I had already worked with the team, so they knew me, I knew them. So I did that for 2 years, and then I applied for my MPH, and I stayed at Michigan. And that's where I entered the CEESP program. And then after graduating with my MPH, I got a job at the American Cancer Society as an epidemiologist. And after that, working for 4 years, I applied for a PhD program. And during my PhD, I actually kind of went back to work at the American Cancer Society, which is where I am today. So you might be wondering why I took so many breaks. And it's because I wasn't really sure of what I wanted to do. So my approach to things was not kind of to jump in, but I just kind of wanted to see what it was like, to first explore public health, and then I wasn't, for a PhD, I thought I might want to do it, but I wasn't quite sure, and I thought it might be helpful to gain some experience and publish a little bit more and kind of work with different mentors. And as I said, I think it was just my personality type, and I think there's certainly benefits of going straight through, and I'll talk about some of those when I talk about some of the challenges that I had when I returned to school as a PhD student. So for each, I'm going to kind of talk about my different experiences and my challenges and then some lessons learned. So this is my summer research project. I looked at the incidence of bladder cancer in the Nile Delta region of Egypt, and I'm not really going to talk about any of my data, but just to show you that, yes, I did a project. This was me 10 years ago. And some challenge, I experienced the same challenges you all had. So I'm not really going to talk a lot about it because you've all demonstrated, these challenges and that you've overcome them, which I think is really wonderful. And I think one thing that you probably haven't gotten to just yet is publishing a paper. So some of you maybe have published, some of you haven't, and for me it was the first time of publishing a paper, so that was just a completely new experience. It was different than writing some type of class paper. But some lessons that I learned is that I really liked cancer epidemiology and special populations, so it was really confirmatory that this is something that I wanted to do. Again, data can be messy. And then in terms of when you're writing your paper, I received so many comments from my co-authors. I actually wondered if I was the first author because there was just so many track changes, and I was, I really felt kind of guilty about that. But I understand that that's just part of the process. It was really tempting just to accept the track changes and kind of move on and go on to my next, assignment or whatever I was doing. But I really encourage you when you get comments back to really almost study them, to learn them. Like, okay, why is this in here? Just organizationally. I think to me that was a really big learning experience. It's just kind of seeing what my co-authors were saying, and some of them are here today. Dr. Salmon and Dr. Wilson. So as I mentioned, after I graduated, or actually I think it was my second year of my MPH, I started applying for jobs, and I applied for one at the American Cancer Society, and I didn't even know that they had a research department, but I think I found a job posted online somewhere. And ACS is a large nonprofit. They rely on rely on donations. They have a lot of different things that they do, kind of going to Dr. Wilson's point about working at a non-government organization. Yes, they do fund and conduct research, but they also provide support to cancer patients by building hope lodges. They have call centers, they provide transportation, they develop screening guidelines, nutrition and physical activity guidelines, and they also have a really big and growing advocacy arm. So they're really trying to promote policies that will help cancer patients or help preventive services, such as lately the policy staff has really been advocating for the Affordable Care Act in kind of a bipartisan way to improve cancer screening. So within the ACS research department, we have an extramural arm, which is where most of the research budget goes, and they award grants to people. And then we have an intramural research department, which is the department I work in, and we have different branches. We have an epidemiology branch that conducts large cohort studies looking at etiology. So that's like the classic epidemiology branch. And then mine is the surveillance and health services research. And we examine cancer incidence, so similar to some of your project where you're kind of looking at cancer incidence patterns, mortality patterns, early detection and treatment in order to help guide cancer control efforts. And then some of you had talked about survivorship, quality of life, and that's what our behavioral researchers do. We also have an economic and health policy research arm, and then a statistics and evaluation center. So each of these different groups hires epidemiologists, and we all kind of work together in different ways, either around a disease site. So for people who are interested in breast cancer, they kind of work based on disease sites or even exposure. So some people are really interested in tobacco, so they kind of gather around the exposure. So what we do is, the main thing that we do is conduct original research and publish papers, similar to an academic department. We also produce educational publications, so if you've seen the facts and figures, and that's kind of a different skill set in trying to write for the lay audience. We also have to provide data to our ACS programs and policymakers, and a lot of researchers try to maintain some type of academic appointment because a lot of us came from academics and enjoy mentoring students and teaching, so we get to do a little bit of that. You might be wondering if we write grants, and we're actually not required to, but we're encouraged to. And it's something I'm interested in, because if you write your own grants, then you gain independence and kind of gain some of the benefits of working in an academic institution. So it's not something I've done, but it's something I would like to do. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about my experience, when I got out of my MPH working at ACS, because I know some of you are also interested in having a job after you graduate. And I was basically a data analyst, and I examined, my area of research was supposed to be to examine disparities in cancer treatment and outcomes. And my day-to-day was just a lot of data analysis, and eventually I helped with these educational publications, so kind of more writing for the lay audience. You might be wondering if I missed having a global focus, and I certainly did. I kind of really enjoyed that kind of in the field, doing research part of it. But again, we were really focused on disparities, so I still kind of had that, disparities in cancer and epidemiology and special populations still kind of baked into this area of research. So some real world challenges that I had was that my hiring supervisor left after 2 months, and he was awesome. He used to be a professor at in the health policy program at Michigan, so he was like really, to have a professor as your boss is really great, but he left. It was in 2008, so we had an economic recession and a hiring freeze, so we rely on donations, and when the economy went down, so did our budget. So we couldn't hire anybody else, so I was kind of hired to be a data analyst for primary investigators that we couldn't hire, that my boss left. So I was like wondering if I was even valuable or what I was going to do. But what I think a lot of you have demonstrated is really just turning a challenge into an opportunity and making yourself useful. So the first thing I did is I had this massive data set of like 1 million cancer patients a year, And I couldn't really go through each record, but I just started looking at like, okay, what data elements are missing? You know, how are things coded? And I just create these memos. And finally, you know, somebody was like, oh, these are super useful, because I wanted to make myself useful. And eventually we did have some money to hire researchers, and I started writing their methods and results. So I was their data analyst, and then I'd help with their methods and results, and I'd kind of make comments on their introduction and conclusion. And then eventually I was given the opportunity to write my own papers. And again, this was just mainly because they thought, oh, you're kind of good at this, and we don't have time to write this paper, so why don't you write it? So I think a lot of these opportunities, I mean, I wasn't really pushing for it. I mean, I was just kind of like demonstrating that I'm like, okay, I'm really good at this, I'm patient. And a lot of times those opportunities will just come by you demonstrating your ability to work hard. And then especially if you work with busy people and you're not so busy, then they want to, you know, have you help them with writing a paper. And that's kind of my path to being able to first author papers at this job. And some of the lessons I learned is I actually really liked writing. You know, at first, I talked about my first paper from the CEESP program, and I was like, what am I doing? This is painful, this is really hard. But after you do a few of them, it's like, oh, this is super interesting. I got really into it. Again, but being flexible with your research interests, making yourself useful. And also, I don't want to say I latched on to somebody, but like I just had to find a mentor. I knew I was going to flail if I didn't have somebody. And I did. I found a mentor. And some of them weren't even in my department, just somebody who could kind of help me navigate you know, this job. And also being a good analyst might lead to opportunities as a first author paper. So you know, I think demonstrating that you're just really organized and responsible is super helpful. So after about 4 years of working, I decided it was time to apply to a PhD program, and I applied to 5 programs. And one of the places I applied was Emory, and I ended up going to Emory. And one of the reasons was geography, and also Emory, and as well as Michigan. I have to make a plug for them too. Emory and Michigan were one of the 2 places, those were both programs that funded their students and made sure you had funding. And I really recommend you think about that, because there's practical considerations of taking out student loans. And also, the atmosphere is different. I feel like if all the students are funded and taken care of, there's less competition and there's more collegiality. So to me, my experience at Emory was really, really positive. All the students were really nice. There's a lot of support. And also identifying somebody that you want to work with. So some of the universities that I applied to, I got accepted, but I didn't really identify somebody who I wanted to work with. And that's really, really important. And then also some of the programs just seemed, they were bigger and they were more competitive, and I got in, but it just didn't seem, I mean, they were higher ranked than Emory, but I just knew it just wasn't for me. So I think paying attention to kind of your personality and what you want is more important than rankings, and also who your mentors are. So for Emory's PhD program, I think it's typical of other programs, although there might be some variation, but I had to take 2 years of coursework and then a qualifying exam at the end of the second year. And then I also had to do teaching and research assistantships and then a dissertation proposal and defense. And after I finished my coursework, I actually went back to work at ACS because they had a position open that I was interested in, and they called me and they kind of asked me if I would come back. And I only did it after making sure my advisor was on board. I really had to do a lot of communication at that point, making sure my whole committee was on board. That was the only way it was going to work out. And I don't necessarily recommend going back to work if you don't have that type of supportive situation, because I think it would make it really hard to finish your dissertation if you didn't have that. So one of my biggest challenges with my PhD was returning to the classroom. So I've been working for 4 years. You know, I really felt good about myself. I was publishing papers, but that first semester was a rude awakening because I had to take some probability classes. I couldn't remember how to do calculus. I had to watch YouTube videos made for like high school students, I think, because I couldn't remember how to integrate. And so I think that first semester was just tough. So I think actually one of the values of going straight through is that, you're already kind of, used to taking tests, doing homework problems, and I just was out of shape. And I also realized, at first I thought I was on this like linear path. Like I just thought I was, floating along. I was doing great, but really I think the process of learning epidemiology is really not linear. It's more of this curve of kind of going up and down, and sometimes you're in a valley, but just remember that you'll go up. And one of my professors showed this to us, or my class, the first day of her course, which was a challenging one. I think it was good for me to keep in mind. I also taught for the first time, which was interesting and challenging. And again, I worked while writing my dissertation, and it worked out for me, but it would not have worked out had I not had a supportive group. And also, I think I had to spend a lot of time communicating with everybody, making sure everybody was okay and involved. And I also had to pick a dissertation topic that I knew could be part of my job at ACS, as well as my advisor knew about colorectal cancer screening. It was a major priority area for ACS. It was something I was interested in, so that's what I made my dissertation about. So lessons I learned from my PhD program is that I like teaching, but maybe only occasionally. I'm an introvert, so for me, teaching takes a lot out of me. So I was felt like I ran a marathon after teaching a class, and I only did it once a week. And that day, I was nervous the entire day. So maybe it wouldn't have been that nerve-wracking had I gotten used to it. But I knew I really like this, but I'm not sure it's gonna fit with my personality. I also love the academic environment. Again, the idea of writing grants and kind of having my own funding. That was a little bit daunting, but I think for some of my other classmates who are now, assistant professors, they just kind of are able to kind of roll with it. And they're awesome at that. So again, I think it's just about knowing who you are. And then also returning to the classroom was humbling, and that I really think luck matters sometimes. I don't want to pretend that I planned all of this or was responsible for how well all this worked out, because I really think I got lucky in many ways. But I think we also create our own luck too. So next I want to talk about what it's like to be a PhD level researcher at ACS or some other place. And what's different about being a PhD level researcher compared to an MPH level researcher, what is more responsibility to publish, come up with ideas, working more closely with departments, meaning dealing with headaches, more politics, helping other research, I help MPH level researchers come up with their research topics, but really I'm trying to create a program of research as opposed to just doing kind of random studies. But I still do some of the same stuff, running data analysis, troubleshooting issues, collaborating with other researchers. And my current research is on cancer screening research. So I look at disparities in cancer screening, quality of cancer screening. I look at the impact of achieving cancer screening goals, how we might achieve those goals, and policies and recommendations. So really the program of research that I'm trying to build is just around cancer screening, and then specifically colorectal cancer screening. So one of the fun parts of my job, I think, is doing useful studies. So we have meaning ACS has a goal to increase colorectal cancer screening prevalence to 80% by 2018, 80% by 2018, yeah. And to do so, they're trying to funnel resources by geography. And what they were asking was how many people need to be screened in each state, and we also, so it was fun to do this project because they're actually taking the data and using it. So that's kind of one of the fun parts of my job. Another fun part of my job is looking at where cancer screening isn't working. So there's something called interval cancers that occur despite screening, and we were able to look at racial and ethnic disparities in interval colorectal cancer screening in a population-based cohort study. And this kind of can help inform some guidelines. So for example, blacks are more likely to have interval colorectal cancer incidence. So this might lend itself to kind of looking at the guidelines and creating race or more intensive screening for blacks in the United States. And then another thing I do is I collaborate a lot with other institutions, and one of them is Kaiser Permanente Northern California. They have an organized colorectal cancer screening program. So one of the studies I did was to look at colorectal cancer screening initiation at the age of 50, and we identified, this is kind of hard to see here, is that Hispanics were much less likely to participate in the program. So now they're trying to figure out, what can we do to increase screening in our Hispanic population. So I think I like the blend of research and also kind of some practical things that might happen. Some challenges in my current position is balancing my personal research interests within a larger organization, because I really like colorectal cancer screening now. I have this, a lot of good collaborators that are really helpful, but at the same time, I'm really responsible for looking at breast, lung, prostate cancer screening, and I just I need to get into those areas, and I haven't done so it's kind of a little bit of a challenge for me. Also, again, it's kind of starting up a research portfolio. And also, there's only a few people who do screening research at ACS, so I really rely on collaborations. And to do that, I really need to network, and I'm not really good at that. But I have successfully maintained some good collaborations, and I think that's really important. And I also think, just kind of in general, I talk about this with my colleagues, is trying to build expertise, but also maybe not siloing yourself. So I think, to me, it's hard as a kind of a junior investigator to balance these two things. Lessons I'm still learning is that peers, even on other disciplines, can offer great advice. So I have friends, peers at work who kind of give me advice on different things, so it's always good to ask questions. Again, this issue of healthy work-life balance and setting limits, something that I struggle with, and also I was given the advice to set my expectations early. So, how available do you make yourself? Because really, I think I could work a lot, and I'd be happy doing that, but again, like, your family might not be happy with that. And also maybe your health, you think about your own health. So I'm also trying to, I really like academia. I really like my job, but trying to maintain ties to academia and creating, I guess my lesson here is creating what you like about different parts of epidemiology in your job. So I like academia, so I work really closely with people from UPenn and other institutions. So maybe I'll try to also be have an adjunct appointment once I get a little bit more organized. And I also, again, this idea of paying attention to co-author and reviewer comments. So really trying to see if there's themes in the feedback that you're getting. I've recently had feedback from reviewers that I'm presenting too much data. So I'm kind of letting that sink in and just say, like, okay, it's come up twice, so I need to change something that I'm doing. So take reviewer comments not as, well, they are criticism, but constructive criticism, even if sometimes they can not be very nice, but they're still helpful. And my advice is, it's okay to be unsure, but don't let it paralyze you. And I think I don't need to, I think Dr. O'Donnell and Dr. Wilson, I think they gave great advice that I don't think I need to repeat. And then also I wanted to show this article that one of my colleagues co-authored, and it's talking about careers in cancer prevention outside of your academic department. So this is a really helpful article that I wasn't aware of until I actually was talking to my colleague about coming here. So she gave me this, and I want to thank her for that. And then I wanted to show a picture of my research team. So this is a group of 16 of us that work together. And some of them have interest in global health. There's 3 or 4 researchers who do kind of more what some of you are doing. So I'd be happy to talk to you tomorrow about what type of opportunities we have. And then also just some of my collaborators that were really helpful with making some of my, I borrowed some of their slides and just gave me some ideas. And thank you for inviting me. And
thank you.
I don't know if we have time we probably don't have time for questions, but I'm around tomorrow. Feel free to ask.
Okay, so put a plug in for the ACS, and the Cancer Facts and Figures, which is published every January, is the #1 most cited article in cancer, in the whole field of cancer. So just remember that if you're looking at U.S. data for any of the cancers, that this would be one of the major citations that you would have in the introduction to your paper. And it's available online, and they also provide ready-made slides that you can download into PowerPoint. Great resource.
And they have supplements now for minority populations.
We do, yeah. And they take a lot of time to make, so please use them.
Use them.
We'll talk more, but we have dinner behind you here, and we have a cake because we have 2 birthdays today, and we want to wish Marcella and Mario happy birthday.
Hey.